Communicating with a team of human hunters should be easy. It should not be hard for people to say words to their teammates that communicates information. Unfortunately, in my experience of watching and playing many games of Fury of Dracula, and many of which that include playing with actual human hunters, most communication sounds like this.
Are you saying that Count Dracula is our vampire?
Yes! And no.
Then what are you saying?
I'm saying no. But I'm leaning towards yes.
Then you're saying yes.
No.
Then it's no.
Not necessarily.
You sound dubious.
No, I'm positive.
Of what?
My theory!
And that would be?
The theory of yes or no.
It is vitally important that when you communicate with your fellow hunters, that you are specific and precise, and that you do not obfuscate. Dracula is the great obfuscator who hides information. Hunters should, especially for new players, and generally speaking, play with an open hand of event cards. Event cards are nearly worthless if you do not know which event cards you as the hunters have access to. Say what event cards you have. If you are watching any of my games as hunters, and a lot of others with Scott Sword and other players, the good players are constantly flipping between their hands of event cards, keeping track of, oh, what do you have? What do you have? Who had planned ambush? Do I have heroic leap? Is surprising return a card that I have access to? All of these different questions. Oh, do I have newspaper reports? Do we have speedy telegraph? These are all questions that are constantly being asked when someone has access to all 4 different hands of hunters. When you're only looking at one hand, it becomes so much harder to keep track of what everybody has. So you need to constantly be reminding everyone, I have speedy telegraph, I have blood transfusion, I have chartered carriage. Who had sense of emergency again? Oh yeah, it was you. But Quincy, you say, from atop your mound of golden chalices, won't that give an unfair advantage to Dracula? Yes. You know what will give a much bigger unfair advantage to Dracula? Not knowing what events you have. Now that I have said that, there are a few events to which that previous rule of say everything do not apply. And so it's going to be much easier for me to teach this method to you by pointing out the event cards that you should not announce, and instead of going through every single one, because I'm going to say the same thing about every single one. Say that you have it. And that exception is, firstly, money trail. So, money trail you should not say if you have. And the reason why is that that information going to hunters doesn't help your situation. But it does help Dracula, because if Dracula knows, oh, they have money trail, then he either won't go to sea, or he will go to sea knowing that he'll be revealed and wait to do it in a circumstance where him being revealed won't be bad. Once Dracula's at sea and has moved a second time, then you can be like, hey guys, I got money trail, how do we want to use it? Via trading with Van Helsing, it can be good to try to get this to Lord Godalming, but you don't lose a whole lot by not saying to the hunters that you have money trail. The other really important one that you do not want to tell, this I think would be the biggest one, is Great Strength. Great Strength you absolutely do not want Dracula to know that you have, because the whole point of this is that it's a surprise card. The other reason why you don't want to say it is because you can use Great Strength from anywhere. There's no real need to tell people that you have it. A little bit of value is added if a hunter knows that they will be saved from Great Strength and they can use a weapon. And so if the hunter gets down to a situation where they are at 2 health and they might die, then at that point you might tell them, hey, I have Great Strength, so do whatever your attack is knowing that I can save you. And Whether or not you should say it at that point is kind of up to you, and it depends on the circumstance, and then I can understand it. But definitely outside of combat, never say that you have great strength. Inside of combat, maybe. It depends. Another one, which generally you don't really want to say, and this is sort of for similar reasons to Money Trail, is hypnosis. You may have to communicate to get this to the people who need it, but that gets into the really bad circumstance that I've seen in a lot of communication where it's like, hey Mina, I have a card that would be good for you. That is horrible. It's bad talk. Just say what the thing is. Mina, I have a heroic leap and it would be useful for you to have. And then you trade it to them. You can be tricky about items, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but when it comes to events, just let people know what you have. Hypnosis, part of the reason you might want to keep it hidden is that wolf forming, Dracula will be more careful with his wolf forming if he knows you have hypnosis, or his ocean movements. But if you need to communicate it in order to get it to Mina, like, if you're Seward and you have hypnosis, just say, Van Helsing, I have hypnosis, I need to trade it to Mina. Or maybe you can say, I have a card that I think I need to trade to you, if you want to be tricky. And yes, every so often, you can just, like, lie and be like, hey, Van Helsing, I have hypnosis or Money Trail, when you don't. I'm not convinced that's a good idea because you're going to trick the other hunters. You might trick Dracula into not going to sea, but that's kind of like wolf forming into a hide. Like, maybe it'll work, and sometimes it can be a good idea, but generally just communicate. Each of the hunters is like a part of your brain, and they need to communicate with each other. The part of the brain that's Mina needs to be getting information from the part of the brain that's Van Helsing, which needs to be getting information from the part of the brain that's Lord Godalming. And compartmentalizing that stuff is just not good. Now, there's some other ones. These ones are kind of, maybe hide it, maybe don't. It's not that big of a deal. Wax cylinders, maybe you don't want to say that you have it, because Dracula knowing that you have it, at least before you use it the first time, means that he's not going to hide. So, like, use it once for the analysis effect, and maybe don't say that you have the wax cylinders before then, unless you need to trade it. But that's a very low-level card that you may or may not want to say. Another one, maybe forewarned. Maybe don't mention that you have forewarned. You can... just because it's not usually vital that you trade this to somebody who needs it. However, if it is, and suddenly becomes very vital, you absolutely need to say, hey, I have forewarned, we need to trade it to the person who we think is going to move into the fog. Otherwise, it can be kind of good to hold onto these, but it's not that big of a deal, because all you have to do is be ambushed once, and then that timing window pops up, and then Dracula's going to be like, oh, he has forewarned. So it's not that big of a deal. Again, it's mostly Money Trail and Great Strength, which are the big ones that you don't want to say. Everything else, like, these ones I'm talking about now are kind of like the maybe don't, but it's really not bad. Consecrated Ground, maybe don't say because it's so powerful. Unless... And so the way that I would talk about Consecrated Ground, this is one of the times where it can be good, where you're like, hey, if we had Consecrated Ground, now would be a good time to play it. Because Dracula knowing that you have Consecrated Ground really makes him play differently. And all of the hunters should be sort of getting items with the idea that they're going to be getting Consecrated Ground. So the knowledge that you have Consecrated Ground doesn't really change how the hunters play. So that new knowledge doesn't really help a whole lot. Except for in certain circumstances, and you do want to notice those circumstances. Like, oh, Dracula's really getting cornered right now. And then you're going to be like, okay, guys, I have Consecrated Ground. Should I use it? And yeah, you're giving free information to Dracula, but when you're playing with 4 hunters, you also are going to have a whole lot more brain power to be able to track down Dracula, and that is really going to make up for the free information to Dracula. It should be a self-balancing thing, except for the fact that when you're playing with a group of hunters, You are only as good as your worst hunter, because really bad hunters will just not say what's in their hand. Say what is in your hand. Say your events. It is better to say all of your events, even the money trail and the great strength, as opposed to just not saying them at all. Because it's so important for hunters to know what they can do, because hunter play revolves significantly around pulling off combos. This is especially true for things like renewed vigor. Don't you dare be like, oh, I don't want to let them know that I don't have renewed vigor, because then Dracula's going to know we can do a cool combo. No, if you don't say that you have renewed vigor, you cannot do the cool combo. I know it sounds like I'm being mean here, but I've just seen so many new hunters and old hunters be like, oh, I'll be clever and try to speak in code and not say what I do, and do like what that video was where I showed, where I was being vague. It's like, ooh, do I think that I have this event or that event? The theory of yes or no. No! The theory of no, don't do that. Be specific and precise, and say what is in your hand a lot. This is especially true for rail tickets. For the love of all that is good and holy, say when you draw glue tickets. Once you have a glue ticket, say it. Constantly be keeping track of the glue tickets. Once you have all 3 glue tickets, then be keeping track of how many fast tickets and how many slow tickets you have for the horse movement. That's just really important to keep track of, so you know the stats, so someone knows what the chances of them having a successful horse can be. Just say that, especially for the tickets, because Dracula knowing what the ticket economy is will not change what he can do. It will not change what he will do. It's really not that useful information to him. It's slightly useful, but it is just devastating to the hunters if they do not know the status of their movement tickets. Okay, let's go over items real quick. Items, you don't really need to say what you have, because giving away what items you're holding on to actually does really help out Dracula, because then he knows how to fight you. Seward, knowing whether or not Mina has a knife, isn't really that big of a deal. Now, if they're going to trade, then maybe it's a big deal, but once you trade, then you can see what's in their hand, and you get to deal with it. So, for the most part, never actually say what items you were holding on, with, again, a few exceptions. One is Heavenly Host, when someone brings up the topic of consecrated ground. Then you need to be like, okay, everybody, who has Heavenly Host? I have Heavenly Host, you have Heavenly Host, okay, we have 2 Heavenly Hosts, and the consecrated ground, which means we can drop down 3. Let's strategize, understanding that. Oh, you are holding on to 2 Heavenly Hosts. Okay, well, we need to get one of those traded over so that we can properly do consecrated ground. Be upfront about that. Yes, Dracula knowing you have Heavenly Host is really bad, and in a group of hunters, Heavenly Host is not as strong as it is when you're playing 1v1. But consecrated ground is really powerful, and that's why I say you wait to say, hey, I have the Heavenly Host until people start talking about using the consecrated ground. Okay, horses, I was going to bring up as an example, but horses reveal themselves anyway when you use them, so it's not really a big deal. But basically, what I'm wanting to say about that is, if you have a horse, say it. Because it is very important for the general strategy when people know the effective range of various hunters. So, if you have a horse, say that you have a horse. So that you can be like, oh, you can move 2 spaces to get there. Maybe. Depending on our ticket economy. Which, again, you need to be precise about. Constantly be saying how many tickets you have to the other hunters. And then the other one I would say is stakes, actually. The value that is gained by Dracula not knowing that you have a stake is like 2 to 4 damage, which is not that big of a deal, but it's really, really important for the group as a whole to know, okay, Mina, I understand that you can move to this space where there's an encounter. Do you have a stake? Do not ask, hey, Mina, can you take care of that vampire? Because Mina might be like, oh yeah, I have a Heavenly Host and a knife. Yes, I can take care of that vampire. And then the other person will hear, aha, they have a stake. They can kill that vampire. And then they don't. And then they run in. And then they get ambushed by a new vampire. And Mina then cannot kill that new vampire with a rumor token on it. And then the new vampire matures, scores 6 points, and refreshes wolf form. I'm not saying that happened to me specifically. I'm just saying, actually, I think that very specific circumstance might have happened to me a time or two. My point is, be specific about stakes when it comes to questions of being able to take out various encounters. Because if it is a risk, and it is, oh, Mina actually doesn't have a stake, she just has a knife in the Heavenly Host. You wouldn't say you have a knife in the Heavenly Host, you would just say, I don't have a stake. And be like, okay, well maybe we need to move Seward in. Maybe I need to trade, maybe I need to use Speedy Telegraph so Van Helsing can go before Seward and trade him a sense of emergency so that he can sense of emergency to the location with the encounter to try to take care of it in the event that Mina can't. That is the kind of sometimes very good move that must be done and can't be done if you do not communicate. And if you don't communicate, you wouldn't have known that you had Speedy Telegraph or sense of emergency. It's just really important to communicate with the other hunters. Constantly be checking what you have as events and just telling other people what you have. Even if it's something as worthless as a blood transfusion or a long night, let them know. Because another really bad thing that can tend to happen when somebody doesn't have an encyclopedic memory of what's in their allies' hands is they start being too optimistic. They're like, oh, he has 2 events. Those events are probably pretty good. I don't know what they are. He hasn't told me what they are yet, but maybe they're good events. You know, maybe they're useful events. Maybe they're a planned ambush and a great strength. Maybe that'll really help in a combat. But if they're 2 blood transfusions, we need to know that they're 2 blood transfusions. We need to not have this false sense of hope. Haha, we have some unknown event. That'll be useful. Or if it is super useful, it's like, oh, it's a renewed vigor, and it's hypnosis. Again, I had said don't talk about hypnosis, but if you're just gonna remember one thing, just say everything, and it's still better if you say nothing. And knowing that you have those really good cards is really useful, and it really helps you plan it out. And I'm kind of on the fence about hypnosis, honestly, on whether or not you should say about it or not. I think it depends on the circumstance. Really, it's Money Trail and Great Strength, which are the ones that are don't say. Which makes me wish I had made this video shorter, but my point is there's a little bit of nuance in some of the other ones. It's not necessarily as simple as just don't say Money Trail and Great Strength. So, hopefully, you will learn to communicate. Playing 4v1 is really, really fun if the hunters play well and communicate. And if not, you will fail, and you will not have Godspeed.